everyone, my name is Gabby and today I'm going to bring you all my thoughts, opinions, and feels on Shade of Iron by Cassandra Clare, Book 2 in the Last Hour series. I am so excited to discuss this book with all of you. I have so many thoughts. I want to just dive right into them because this book is a sequel that is part of a sequel series. It's a sequel to the Infernal Devices series. There's like 20 plus books in the Shadowhunter Chronicles, so if you haven't read them by now, get on it. It's gonna take you a while. For all the people who have read Shade of Iron, we're gonna dive right on in and we're gonna start discussing it. No point in delaying it. So I think one of the things that Cassie did really well with this book that makes it particularly stand out, and even just the series in general now that I've read both books, is that it feels very character driven. I feel like the Mortal Instruments series is very plot based and there's a lot of plot stuff going on. I think a large part of that is because it's the first series, it's a part of this universe. So not only are you having to do all of the character building, but you're also doing a lot of world building in that series, and there's a lot of plot stuff that's going on. And the Infernal Devices feels like the first book where really Cassie got to explore with characters, but there still is a lot of plot stuff happening that feels like it's out the focus of everything that's going on in the book. And The Dark Artifices also is a lot of plot. There's a lot of stuff that happens in that book that you feel like you're sort of losing focus of the characters and the relationships, but this series feels like the first series where we're focusing on relationships, and relationships seem to be at the core of the story and really is what is moving the story forward. And I think a large part of that is because a lot of the series, when we get down to it at the end of the day, is going to be about how the relationships that are formed in this series end up impacting our characters down the line in the Mortal Instruments series, in the Dark Artifices, and sort of change the way that we look at the Shadowhunter family tree and then these characters that we already know and who they may be related to, their origins, all of that. I think Cassie is doing a very good job at letting it be a slow burn, slowly building up to it. You're starting to get more of the puzzle pieces, but I feel like this third book is going to be the one that is going to be the most explosive at really hitting you with all the gut punches, because I'm still holding on to the fact that there's going to be some game-changing things that happen in this third book that fundamentally change the way that we look at the Shadowhunter family tree. One of the first things that Cassie told us is the Shadowhunter family tree that was given to us on the back of Clockwork Princess is misleading. So there obviously has to be a plan for her in mind to alter the way that that family tree is structured and then change the way that we look at characters that we already know. And I'm just thinking about all the relationship things that happened in this book. Already my mind is just going to all of these wild places. So let's talk about our relationships and our big characters and some of the big moments that happen in this book, shall we? It's best to start off with the characters that I believe are our protagonists, sort of the driving characters of this story, James and Cordelia. So the book starts out where Chain of Gold left off, and we have this sort of sham marriage that is going on between James and Cordelia in order to protect both of their reputations among the Enclave. Obviously for Cordelia it's a little bit worse. Societally she would be rejected for having been with a man that she's not married with. She tells that lie for James in order to protect him because he was there and when Blackthorn Manor burned down, and obviously that was found out. That would not be very good for him. There's all of these sort of lies and deceptions going on. James and Cordelia finally get married. They tie the knot. You as a reader, it's very interesting because I think another thing that is really crucial to this series is dramatic irony, and that you are aware of all the pieces of the puzzle and the characters aren't, and you're sort of waiting for them to put those pieces together. As a reader, we know that James is in love with Cordelia and Cordelia is in love with James, but James has the iron bracelet on that Grace put on him that is putting him under this trance and taking away his free will, and so James believes that he loves Grace. And Cordelia thinks that James is in love with Grace. It's just all one big mess. It's a mess, and I believe I mentioned that in Chain of Gold. There's no easy way to explain how this is all going on. It's just a mess is what it is. And then we get a new entry into this puzzle, just making it even worse, which is that Matthew is in love with Cordelia, and so he's watching James, his parabatai, take advantage of Cordelia, who clearly loves him and is really upset. And then you also have all of the trauma that Matthew went through in Ghosts of the Shadow Market and that weighing on him. It's just, Cassie is just, she needs to stop traumatizing her characters. Like, this is just too much. One of the things that I love is that out of all of this, you get to see a lot of scenes between Cordelia and Matthew in this book, and you get to see them bonding and drawing closer together. It gets to the point where Matthew confesses to Cordelia what it is that happened in Ghosts of the Shadow Market, and she is the first and only person that he's ever told told about this happening other than Jem. I believe Jem knows. But the first person in his friend group that he told. I love the fact that he felt comfortable enough to tell Cordelia this, and Cordelia is immediately accepting of him and almost feels sympathy for him, just feels this horrible, devastating heartbreak for him that he's having to put himself through that pain. And I really, really love the scene because I feel like it's getting Matthew one step closer to being able to be honest with all of his friends about what it is that he went through, knowing that they will love him and they will accept him and that they will be there for him through that rather than having to have him suffer. Hopefully we'll get to a point where he even tells his mother about this and that his mom can learn to forgive him and understand the trauma and the pain that he went through, especially at the hands of Alistair and some of the things that Alistair said. But this ending, the ending is so brutal and is very, very similar to the ending of Clockwork Prince. And I think another thing that's sort of interesting about this series is that it's tying back to lots of the other Shadowhunter books that we've had so far, which I think is a really, really smart decision on Cassie's behalf because it's a good way of sort of tying in loose ends and giving us all the other puzzle pieces that we need before we go into the Wicked Powers, the final Shadowhunter Chronicles series, and see this thing to its end, which is going to be really, really sad when we get to that point, but I'm definitely excited for it and excited to have all of the puzzle pieces starting to be filled in. So this ending, very similar to the ending of Clockwork Prince, where Cordelia sees Grace and James embrace and thinks that James is still in love with Grace and that James is going to break off their marriage early from the 1 year that they agreed on and is going to marry Grace and that she's going to be a societal outcast and is going to be shamed because of this. And so she runs away and she goes to Matthew. That's where she feels herself being pulled to. Matthew confesses his love to Cordelia and says, I love you, and I'm beyond irritated that James is not loving you in the way that he should, and proposes that he and Cordelia run away to Paris so he can just give her a good time so that she can just escape all of this like torment that James has put her through. And so they do just that and they're boarding the train. James goes to chase after Cordelia, realizing that she saw James and what it is that he was doing with Grace and wants to explain everything to her, wants to help her understand what it is that he went through, and she doesn't get the chance because he gets pulled away by Will and Magnus because they have to go after Lucy. It's so similar to the ending of Clockwork Prince where Will found out about this curse not being real, that it was a lie, and he spent all of his life pushing these people away that he loves, and he finally goes to confess his love to Tessa, and Tessa's engaged to Jem, and you're like, no! Because it's this place where you're really, really stuck, and especially with Cassie and the way that she writes relationships, you know, all of these characters love each other in this really deep and meaningful way that is just unlike, honestly, anything out there in literature. I have not read any books that just have as profound and deep relationships as the way that Cassie writes them. And so it's so difficult because you know that Will, like in the Infernal Devices, for example, that Will loves Jem and that he wants Jem to be happy, especially because he knows Jem is dying. And it's just, you're just like, you feel this like, it's just a frustration as a reader, and even just for the characters, because it's like, what do you do in that situation? It's just devastating. I went down a really dark path when I'm thinking about like, well, where is this going to go? And I was thinking about the fact, because again, I don't know why I'm still stuck on this idea of just like completely like demolishing the Shadowhunter family tree. Matthew and Cordelia in book 3, Chain of Thorns, are going to be in Paris. They're going to be in the city of love. Matthew is in love with Cordelia. Cordelia at this point thinks that James doesn't love her, and I think could very easily fall in love with Matthew because she sees that he's beautiful and that he loves her. I mean, if that's all you could ever want, what if there is offspring that are produced? I was thinking about this and I was like, we know a fair child that has bright red hair similar to Cordelia's, Clary, obviously, our protagonist of the Mortal Instruments series. And I'm wondering, like, where did she get the flaming red hair from? Where did genetically that come from? I don't know, maybe Cordelia? I don't know. And then obviously they have to go about hiding this in the family tree, and so that's why they alter it, and maybe they say that that child belongs to James. I don't know. I'm just thinking about all these family trees, and there's so many little tiny connections that Cassie drew to previous stories and like seem to make sense based on what we know of the family tree and what we can maybe assume happens that we aren't told about. I have a feeling that whatever is gonna happen with Cordelia and Matthew in Paris is gonna be devastating. Like, I feel like we haven't had the full emotional blow and impact yet. But that ending was so brutal, especially because you have these moments earlier on in Chain of Iron between James and Cordelia where you can see that they both really love each other. There's these gorgeous, absolutely stunning romance scenes that Cassie writes in this book, and one of the reasons why I particularly love them is because they're beautifully written, but they're also human and real, and it doesn't feel like she's trying to romanticize these scenes, but she just makes them feel so beautiful and effortless. I don't even know how to describe it, but just if you read the books, like the writing is so captivating and you just feel the passion between these characters more than anything else. And some of the scenes between James and Cordelia in this book are just, they're stunning. They are like some of the best romance scenes I have ever read. Cassandra Clare is the best person at writing romance scenes. I genuinely cannot say that I feel like I have read a book that does romance scenes as well as she does. I feel like maybe it's just my personal taste as well that plays into it, because I'm not big on it being super graphic and intense and descriptive. I very much love the way that Cassie writes her scenes to be very poetic and beautiful, but also very natural. Like, it doesn't feel like it's trying to be romanticized. And I love that. The scene I think that really like hit me the most, there's two of them, is this one where James is tied to the bed and Cordelia asks for James to kiss her and he does, and you can like so clearly tell that they're in love, and you're just like thinking about the bracelet and you're just like, ugh, you're just so aggravated because of that bracelet, because you can so clearly tell that there's this passion between them. And then we have the scene that happens between them later on where the bracelet breaks, and that was a big part of this book, was how do we get this bracelet off of James? And there's several points where James seems to look and want to go and take off the bracelet, and then he gets distracted and you're just like, why can he not take it off? And it's so frustrating. And my initial thought going into Chain of Iron was that Cordelia was going to find out about what happened with Grace, and she was going to use Cortana to break off the bracelet, and that she would know that James was under the spell and try to do something to stop it. But she never finds out. She still doesn't know by the end of this book, which is, I think, way worse and absolutely Cassandra Clare style. So I shouldn't be surprised that Cassie wrote it that way. It's just so frustrating. Watching the bracelet break, I think, is so much more beautiful that James and his love for Cordelia was able to defy the spell that Grace had put on him through the bracelet. I think that just is so much more powerful, and it really shows the connection that these two characters have. And I'm just really hoping we get all of this resolved in Chain of Thorns, because there's just a lot of miscommunication that's happening and it's so frustrating. Let's talk about Grace Blackthorn next. I think she is sort of really the center that sort of ties all of these characters together, interestingly enough. I think one of the things that Cassie does really, really well is that she builds a significant amount of sympathy for Grace as a character. Chain of Gold, I feel like you're not really feeling Grace. You're just like, I don't like you. You're also not really sure where she lies. Like, does she have her own plan and her own motivations? Is she just following Tatiana's plans because Tatiana is her mother and she doesn't really have any choice? Does she also feel an allegiance towards Tatiana because of Jesse? Like, you don't really know what direction she's going to go in. In this book, Cassie does a really good job of showing Grace and how different she is when she doesn't have Tatiana with her, because Tatiana is at the Citadel and is an Iron Sister, which, like, don't even get me started on that. We'll get to that later. Grace is now living with the Bridgestocks. You're starting to see that she is realizing that her mother has very nefarious plans, that her mother doesn't have Jesse's well interest in mind, and that her mother is actively being manipulated by Belial. And as she's working with Lucy and as she's sort of having to deal with the spell that she put on James, she's starting to feel more guilty about it, because James was one of the only men that she was never able to influence with her power and ability. He was a friend to her and was still nice to her even without her having to manipulate him. You could almost tell that she doesn't like the idea of having to do this, but feels compelled because of Tatiana to do so. She actively goes at one point during the wedding to try to like take the bracelet off to try to end it, and Tatiana stops her, and it's so frustrating because you're seeing Grace start to take this turn for good, starting to not want to be what it is her mother has molded her to be, and you see her really ultimately reach that journey by the end of the book, because she tells Tatiana that she refuses to manipulate Jesse because Jesse is her brother. She is not going to enchant him. She then goes to the only person that she knows to go to, James, and obviously she still thinks that James is under her spell and she's going to try to manipulate James in the way that she always has. James plays along. Cordelia then oversees this and thinks that James is normal and this is just him confessing his love for Grace, and it's not. He's lying. Goes and pulls Grace aside. Grace comes out with it about the bracelet, and you see through some of these chapters throughout the book her perspective and sort of the build up to what led her to this point, which I think is a really great way for Cassie to build sympathy for her character and make her this really morally great character, because all she knows is tempting men, because that's all that Tatiana taught her. Now she is left on her own to her own devices and she doesn't know anything else to do, so she comes to James and she tries to use this. It doesn't work. She sees the shards of the bracelet. James goes to her and says, like, you are not my friend. Nothing between us. You can tell he's really angry, especially because he's had years of his life taken away from him in which he's been toyed and manipulated with his emotions, and his own free will has been taken away from him. Says that you are going to go to the Enclave, you are going to go to the Silent Brothers, we are going to try to remove this curse that Belial put on you, because you find out Belial is the one that is responsible for giving Grace this ability. You are going to end this. I love the fact that James calls her out, that he puts her in her place, but the book ends and you don't really know where Grace stands or what it is that's going on, because now James has been ferreted away to go after Lucy. You're not really sure if she's ever gonna actually turn herself in or she's gonna have this ability. Like, what is gonna happen? We don't know. I do feel bad for Grace, I think, now. I definitely believe the Chain of Thorns is going to be her turn towards wanting to be with the Merry Thieves, wanting to be friends with all of them, and actively turning against her mother and fighting for what's good. And I love the fact that we get to see that turn as character. I always love morally great characters like that and love watching that journey, just because I feel like there's the best character development there when you see somebody who's made bad decisions come to learn to make good decisions and come to be embraced by people who are good-hearted and kind and love them, and be able to see that that's just sometimes what people need, is to be loved and to have a community. Also, one of the other things that I loved is that Cassie is sort of hinting at this relationship between Grace and Christopher, which, according to the family tree on the back of Clockwork Princess, because I love referencing that just for everything, Christopher and Grace supposedly end up together, and their line ends up being tied to Alec and Isabel. I'm looking at the computer and was making sure that I was correct when I was saying that, and yes, that's true, at least as of what we know. I love the fact that Cassie had just a small scene, and I think that was all that was needed to sort of show the way that Christopher and Grace connected, and that Christopher, who's into science and tinkering and all these gadgets and things, that Grace is actually interested in hearing about that, and that they have this connection and she doesn't need to manipulate him. And I would really like them together. I like that one little scene that we got, and I thought it was really cute and really sweet, and I think that definitely we're going to see more of that in Chain of Thorns, especially if that ends up being our end game. I like the idea of the two of them being together and being sciencey. I feel like they have this very natural connection that I feel like we haven't really seen Christopher have me with the other characters. Obviously he fits in with the Merry Thieves, but he sort of is tinkering on his own and sort of is doing his own thing, and it's nice to sort of see him have somebody who actively is interested and wants to hear about those things and seems to understand it. I really like them together. Okay, let's talk about Lucy and Jesse and Malcolm Fade, because he gets roped into all of this. So Lucy, her entire mission throughout all of Chain of Iron is try to bring Jesse back from the dead, because she is in love with Jesse. She doesn't want to be involved in necromancy, but she has this ability to be able to command ghosts, to be able to command the dead. She is thinking that this could possibly work, that this could be a way to be able to bring Jesse back, and her and Grace are experimenting and trying to figure this out, and ultimately a lot of Lucy's character is learning more about Jesse and his death and the circumstances surrounding it. What we end up finding out is that the reason that Jesse died in the way that he did is because Tatiana refused to have an Iron Sister and a Silent Brother perform the ritual on Shadowhunters that is supposed to keep out demonic influence. And I find it very interesting, just a quick sidebar, that we're tying back to that, because obviously that was a large part of the Mortal Instrument series, because Jace, it dies in City of Glass and then doesn't have those wards put on him again when he's brought back to life, so he's able to be possessed by Lilith, which again also ties back into this book. So I feel like Cassie's doing something. Everything she does is intentional, and I see you, Cassie. I see you. Anyway, Emmanuel Gaff Guest, who Lucy summons in Chain of Gold, is the one that instead performed this ritual in order to try to rid Jesse of demonic influence. Unfortunately, what Tatiana did not know is that Belial was in cahoots with Emmanuel Gast, was working with him, and so Emmanuel Gast puts this anchor into Jesse that would allow Belial to be able to possess him. Unfortunately, when Jesse finally gets his first rune, the rune does not respond well to that anchor in him that is demonic, and so he ends up dying. And so what this leaves room for is for Belial to be able to possess his half-alive, half-dead corpse, because now Tatiana has preserved him, so he's in this sort of limbo state. Jesse ends up being the murderer that is going about and killing all of these Shadowhunters and is stealing their runes. And it's Belial that is possessing Jesse. But interestingly enough, James is able to see visions of this instance and everything that's going on, and it never really is explained how he ends up seeing those things, because obviously Belial had no intention of allowing him to see that, but maybe it was Jesse because James is alive because of Jesse's last breath. So maybe that, we never really get that explained. I don't know if it's going to be explained at all in Chain of Thorns or what happened there. This scene I really love at the end, where we have this big showdown happening. Belial essentially goes to Lucy's face and is like, you are worthless, you are nothing, you're a woman, and like super misogynist and rude. I mean, it's not even that, it's cruel. I love the fact that Lucy just commands Jesse and she's like, force Belial out of your body, get rid of him, and Belial's like, you stupid child, and then like Jesse does it and Belial ends up being kicked out of Jesse's body, and Cordelia and James use Cortana to stab him for the second time. Oh man, I love that scene, because I feel like Lucy is sort of written as this character who's very bookish and she likes writing, and maybe she's not necessarily that much of a fighter, and she's a hopeless romantic, and it sort of feels like she's kind of there hovering on the sidelines a little bit, but seeing her just have, like, use that power and take down Belial, who just like threw that in her face. It reminds me so much, because I just recently watched Captain Marvel, of that moment at the end with Carol and Yamrog, where Yamrog is going on this whole spiel, blah 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 blah, and Carol's like, I don't have to prove anything to you. It reminds me so much of that, and I love those moments because they're just so badass and empowering. Now we end Chain of Iron with Lucy being able to use her ability successfully to be able to bring Jesse back to life. Right now, I'm kind of unclear as to if Jesse is under Belial's influence or not, because the epilogue kind of had me a little confused for a second, and I was like, is Jesse somehow still under Belial's control? Is he not? I'm like right now leaning more towards not, because I don't think that Belial or Tatiana know that Jesse is alive, but he is. It'll be very interesting to see what Will and Magnus and James make of all of this when they find Lucy in Cornwall with Malcolm Fade, which is the other part of this. So Lucy enlists the help of Malcolm Fade to try to help with bringing Jesse back to life, and he initially refuses to help because he doesn't want anything to do with necromancy. He says that that's evil magic, and even sort of goes about describing like some of the things that would have to be done, and says like those are horribly evil acts and there's no way. But again, being a reader and Cassie's use of dramatic irony in this book, we know where his path leads him to bringing Annabelle back from the dead and performing those very same acts that he refuses to do in this book. However, Lucy makes an agreement with him that she has not fulfilled yet, which we are probably going to see her fulfill in Chain of Thorns, which is that she says that she will summon Annabelle's ghost if Malcolm Fade helps bring Jesse back. Unfortunately, that deal went a little bit south because Lucy was able to bring Jesse back on her own, so now I don't know if she's going to summon Annabelle or not. Either way, in this book, Malcolm finds out about how Annabelle died and that she's not alive and that she's not with the Alien Sisters like he was told to believe. So we see him get that information, how much it pains him, and so you get a little bit of an understanding of what drove him to do what he did in the Dark Artifices. And again, it's Cassie just really filling in all of these puzzle pieces and getting you to be able to see all the different perspectives and how we will end up at our conclusion and where we get to where we are. It's just such brilliant writing, and there's no other author that I know who can take so many different series and manage to perfectly piece them all together to create this gorgeous puzzle. There's just nobody out there that is doing what it is that Cassie is doing. It's just unbelievable. And reading some of those scenes with Malcolm finding out about Annabelle, you're just like, oh my god, like where is this going? Because we haven't really gotten to the point where Malcolm is going to feel driven to bring Annabelle back. I feel like he's still sort of on the fence. So whatever the hell happens in Chain of Thorns, where it's gonna have to be such a driving force that he would decide to do these things that he's so fundamentally against. And I'm very, very curious to see how that is all going to pan out, because a lot of this book is just more build up and setup, and we haven't really gotten anything concretely settled yet. So the third book has a lot of work to do to sort of explain some things and get us to where we need to be before we can get to the wicked powers. Oh, just so many thoughts running through my head as to all the different possibilities and how these things could happen. Let's talk about our villains now, our antagonists. So let's start with Tatiana, because I think she's the easiest to talk about because she doesn't really have a lot of page time in Chain of Iron. So the Enclave. this is something I complained about in my review for Chain of Gold, but I'm going to complain about it again because of the ending of Chain of Iron. Why would the Enclave decide, let's take somebody who we know has working with demons and let's put them into the Citadel and let them work with our Animus, because that's just such a smart idea. I don't think the Enclave is smart. I feel like there's a lot of things that they are clueless about, and there's so many things that happen behind their back that they don't know about. But I never really thought that they were dumb. I mean, I thought that they were cruel and that they are a lot of times are run by people who have their own malicious intentions, but I never really thought they were dumb. Like, this is just dumb. What government institution is like, let's take criminals and put them in possession of our most valued material and substances? Get to the epilogue of Chain of Iron, and we see that Tatiana has stolen more Animus, and that she's used that Animus to create this Pithos, which allowed Jesse to be able to steal runes from other Shadowhunters and be able to place them on himself. Obviously he's not doing this, Belial is the one that's doing this, but it's a device that has demonic influence, and so it's able to have that ability in comparison to a normal stele. She also has this key, which I don't know if this is supposed to mean something to me at this point, or if I'm just sort of going to have to see where this goes, but it's the key to the Iron Tomb. I don't know if that's supposed to, I don't know what the Iron Tombs are. Are we supposed to know? I feel like I'm missing something. I'm just like, they have something nefarious planned, but I can't infer from like the key in this location, like what it is that's happening. So I don't know. Either way, all I know is that I don't trust them. There's just more nefarious stuff going on. And I love how Grace warns Tatiana and is like, yeah, the Enclave is gonna come and investigate you, and then obviously she runs away before that can happen. Basically, my biggest complaint with Tatiana right now is that the Enclave is a whole bunch of dumbasses. I'm not even mad at her. Like, she has reason to be angry. Obviously, she's taken it way too far, but like, the Enclave, if they have just like imprisoned her, would have stopped a lot of this. But you know, we all know that the Enclave, they're all idiots. Okay, let's talk about Lilith, because this was the biggest plot twist to me. Lilith was present throughout all of this book. She was pretending to be different characters, and at one point Lilith pretends to be Michael Wayland and gets Cordelia to swear her allegiance to Michael Wayland and says that she will be Michael Wayland's paladin. And so now every time that Cordelia picks up a weapon, she will be able to summon Lilith, so now she can't fight or can't use any weapons. And so now we're gonna have to find a loophole around that in Chain of Thorns. Interestingly enough, if we look at Cordelia's line with James, going back to this family tree, that ties to Jace Herondale, and you want to know who was also possessed by Lilith? Jace Herondale. That was basically like the whole second half of the Mortal Instruments series. So what the hell does that mean? That we're now seeing these ties to characters, like, and then we have Cortana, which Cordelia was noticing earlier on in the book that she wasn't able to pick up Cortana without it burning her, and then now she's able to pick it up, but she's using it to fight for Lilith. It's under Lilith's spell every time she tries to fight. I wonder if there's some genetic predisposition there. That makes no sense at all, but I feel like, again, that has to be intentional. Like, there's no way that Cordelia can be Lilith's paladin, and then James just happens to be possessed by Lilith several generations later. I don't know. I feel like there's a reason behind that. So this is gonna be our big thing in Chain of Thorns that we're gonna have to figure out, is how do we break this? And I'm thinking right now, and I realize this, but I don't know, because when Cordelia swore the allegiance, she swore it to Michael Wayland, not to Lilith, so know that she was swearing her allegiance to Lilith. So is she actually Lilith's paladin, you know? Or when she realized, like, I made the allegiance to Michael Wayland and not to you, and I didn't know that it was you that I swore my allegiance to, so it's, you don't have any control over me. Is it gonna be something like that, like some kind of like tricky loophole, or is there gonna have to be some procedure that's gonna be done to have to sever this allegiance? And what does that have to do with Cortana as a sword? Because we all know that Emma carries Cortana, and Emma comes from Alistair's line. I just feel like I'm reading this book and I'm like, okay, things have happened, but what do these things mean? Like, I'm still not at that point where I feel like I know what is going on and can make concrete connections. I'm like, we are having things happen, but I'm not like, I can't put the pieces into the puzzle yet. I was just given more pieces of the puzzle. It's frustrating. Let's talk about Alistair. His character, I think, is another interesting character because he's sort of this likable, unlikable character. You kind of be feeling on the fence about him because he was really mean and he was a bully, but you learn towards the end of Chain of Gold what it is that he had to do to protect Cordelia from their father and how he was sort of always picked on, and so that led him to become the bully. He ends up realizing that he wants to have these friends, he wants to be able to be a part of the Merry Thieves, and like feels really bad for what it is that he did to Matthew and wants to try to rectify it, but obviously nobody will forgive him because some of the things that he did were really terrible, and is sort of spending a lot of this book distant and on his own and very much isolated. And I think more than anything he could use somebody who loves him. And you have the scene with him and Thomas where Thomas gets accused for being the murderer, and Alistair goes and defends him and says, I was watching him the entire time, like I didn't see him murder anybody. They then spend this moment locked up together in the Institute, and they start to talk, and then they kiss. You're really rooting for them. I'm really rooting for Alistair and Thomas to be together by the end of this because I'm not really a big fan of Matthew's brother Charles, not really vibing with him, and I don't like the idea of Alistair and Charles together, but Alistair and Thomas I love. Somehow, some way, Alistair ends up getting Cortana to be able to pass it down to Emma, so I don't know how that ends up happening, but that's definitely on my mind. But I really do love that scene between Alistair and Thomas. It's really beautiful. Also, just like Alistair and his father and getting to see Cordelia's father come back. I was expecting that there was going to be a bigger overarching plot line here, and he ends up dead after a couple hundred pages. And I was like, okay, I don't really feel bad about this. Cassie does a really good job of just killing characters that sort of feel dispensable, and you're like, oh, well, that's traumatic for the characters, but for me, good riddance. I don't really feel bad about Elias dying. I felt nothing. I am still curious about Cordelia's mother because she's still pregnant in this book. I was expecting her to have the baby by the end of this book just for whatever reason, but there really isn't a lot of time that passes in Chain of Iron. I'm assuming by Chain of Thorns we're going to have to see this baby born. I'm confused. Like, I guess the baby's supposed to be Elias's, but I still don't believe it. I'm not convinced of it yet, because if Elias was gone for all of this time, how could they have baby? And what was Elias doing when he was gone? Apparently he got like this sheath for Cordelia, but we also know he has all of these debts. I don't know. There's something shady going on there. I feel like Cassie's put all these things in that we're either never gonna get answers to at all, and you just kind of shrug whatever, or we end up finding out something really big and explosive. So I don't know, whatever's going on with Cordelia's parents, there's something shady happening there, and I wonder if that has to do with Cortana and why Cordelia wasn't able to grasp it, because it felt like that was the connection that Cassie was drawing, but now that Cordelia is tied to Lilith, there's so many puzzle pieces happening, and a lot of this is just me being like, what the heck is going on, because I don't know. Lastly, we get this really cute scene between Will and Tessa at the end of the book. There's a mention that like Tessa always loves to read, but even being in this like fantastical world that she'll always pick up fantasy books, which I was like, oh, love that. And you get to see the two of them together. And Will and Tessa are so cute, and I love the fact that in the series, as much as it is about their children and this next generation of Shadowhunters, we still get little moments with them. Cassie still gives that to us, and this one scene was just perfect, and it was enough. And I just love Will and Tessa so much, and I miss them. They're such good parents. I just love them. I don't know why the scene made me so emotional, but it did, and it just hurt. It hurt. It really did. But I also just love them. Like, it was just so cute and fluffy, and did I forget anything? Is there anything I forgot? Okay, I guess the last thing that I almost forgot to talk about character-wise, Anna Lightwood. I feel like we see bits and pieces of her, but she's not really a part of the plot. I think because she's older and she's kind of has her own thing going on, her and Ariadne were sort of working on building up between the two of them because Ariadne now is no longer engaged to Matthew's brother, Charles, and so she's kind of just hanging out, and so she wants to be with Anna and recognizes and is trying to apologize, but Anna obviously keeps putting her distance away. But you can tell that hurts Anna, and it's just like, why can we not just have them together? Like, why does everything have to be so difficult with Cassie and her books? It could be so easy to just be like, but obviously there's societal expectations and there's the temptation to not want to get hurt and sort of want to avoid love as much as possible. It's so frustrating, and I feel so bad for Anna because she's such a kick-ass character, and I love that she so fully embraces who she is and isn't embarrassed of it. I really, really love her character for that and respect and admire her character for that. I'm hopeful that we'll get to see Anna and Ariadne together by the end of this, and that we'll get to see Anna learn to love and not be afraid of love. I love the little moments that the two of them had together. It was particularly just, so good. Okay, I think that's it for all my thoughts, opinions, and feels on Chain of Iron. I feel like Chain of Iron did a really good job of getting us one step closer to Chain of Thorns. I feel like Chain of Thorns is going to be really explosive, and there's going to be a lot of bombshells that are dropped, and I'm very, very much looking forward to it. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have made it to the end, tell me your favorite character in this series. Was there a particular scene that you really liked with them? Did you have a favorite moment in the book that you really liked? Let me know all of your thoughts on Chain of Iron down below in the comments, and I will be sure to respond. On that note, hope you all are having a wonderful, wonderful day. If you want to find me on social media, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Gabby Wyatt Books. If you want more videos from me, you can comment and subscribe. That lets me know that you like my content and you want to see more of it from me. Thank you all again so much for watching, and I'll see you next time in a new one. Goodbye!